The timber project is about the trade of timber in Northern Europe over many centuries. In terms of time, is from around 1100 to around 1700 AD. That's the time window I want to study because that's where the change happens. Through dendrochronology, I can find out where timber comes from, and I can, using material from the archaeological record, I can then map the trade in timber, and it's very precisely placed in time because it's a dendrochronologically dated material. I'm making the photos just as close up as possible. Basically, I'm really just using the camera as a microscope. So I have that as my first frame of how I see the trade of timber in Northern Europe. So there have been regions which have been receivers of timber from, like importing timber, and then there are other regions which had an abundance of timber which was able to export their timber to places which were buying it. But there are all sorts of gaps in our knowledge of that. And also because I'm working in the historical period, I see that when we're still in the 12th century, there isn't that significant amount of timber being traded over long distances. But once you start to move through the period that I'm studying, when we get up to around 1400, we actually start to see really the trade of timber from the Baltics, for example, coming into Western Europe. And gradually, trade of timber increases really almost exponentially as we move up into eventually the 17th century. 150, 160, 170, so there's it's also a fairly old tree. I have received money from the European Research Council to study this phenomenon for 5 years, and this is so that I can add a multidisciplinary angle to the study. I currently have a historian already, and then also an archaeologist, and then I want to do some other scientific techniques to fill in some of the gaps that the dendrochronology can't cover. So I'm going to have somebody doing isotope analysis, and I also want to try and see if we can use DNA, all to try to identify the provenance, the place of origin of timber in the archaeological record. Heavy piece. I needed, for me to be able to come forward in my research, to be able to add these other disciplines in there and to fill in the gaps and to sort of widen the story and make a more meaningful study of the mechanisms of the trade, of the actual evidence for trade of timber. I'm being as minimalist as possible just to be able to get a view of the tree rings. This is as non-invasive as you can get if you really want to be able to get the tree ring sequence out of these timbers. Timber is something that you need to use for pretty much everything. It is for building ships, it's for building homes, it's for making furniture, it's for fuel. It is like one of your essential basic materials that humans have been using ever since they started making tools. It is very interesting for us to know how humans have dealt with that problem in terms of a resource through time, and to look into what the kind of solutions that people have found to actually solve that problem. Do they move on to other materials? Do they start to look elsewhere? Do they discover more parts of the world because they need that resource?